on a cloudy day. When it's cold outside, I've got the month of May. Everybody say, I guess you say, what can make me feel this way? It's my girl. I'm talking about my girl. I've got so...
No, we need some good cheer, Keith, on the Friday, October the 28th, 2022. It's been an astonishing week. I mean, it's always eventful when it comes to tech, but I can't ever remember a week that was quite as dramatic, maybe going back to the crash in 2000. I mean, where do we even start this week?
Well, I mean, headlines are Amazon, Microsoft, and Facebook all had huge stock crashes. Apple is up 8%. Twitter is now under Elon Musk's control, and he immediately fired the top team.
And paid them out over 100 million. I mean, and I'm sure that they are partying. They're the ones who have probably had the best week, those guys.
They probably had a very good week. But you're right. It's...
I mean, the statistic that most, maybe this is where we start, the statistic that I find most astonishing, and this is not just for this week, it's for this year, or maybe for the last 12 months, is that Facebook has lost $750 billion of valuation. How is that even conceivable? I mean, if you'd have said that 10 years ago, that a company could lose $750 billion of valuation in a year, you'd think you're insane.
Well, I think the only other comparable time is the 1999-2000 bubble bursting, when Amazon lost more than 90% of its value. It was
in the hundreds of millions. No, it wasn't even in the billions. I don't know what it was worth, but
yeah. Oh no, it was nowhere near worth that much. And I mean, there were no companies worth that much then, period. So yeah, just into absolute numbers, it's staggering. And unlike Amazon in the 90s, in late 90s, early 2000, it's driven by management decisions, not by macroeconomic conditions alone. So I think it's very likely that Zuckerberg doesn't care and is on a mission. And as we know, because of the voting rights within Facebook, he's in control 100%. No one can get rid of him. So I think he's doing it on purpose. Now, if you think about...
What do you mean? Well, he's not losing $750 billion worth on purpose. He's doubling down on the metaverse on purpose.
That's correct. And the other culprit, if you think of it as a culprit in his world, is Apple, with the advertising changes. There's a combination of things that come to a bunch of decisions that investors hate, basically, mostly spending money with no return.
And do you think that future historians of tech might look back at this week as the week when social media, or at least our version of social media, came to an end, with particularly the two events of this dramatic crash of Facebook valuation, the market response to simply not believing in Facebook as maybe either a social media or a metaverse company, and the Musk deal being formalized? This is not coincidental.
It's a very good question. I mean, I saw a tweet this morning from a person I consider to be one of the best product managers in Silicon Valley, a guy called Josh Elman, who is at Apple now, but he was a VC at Greylock, and before that was a leading product manager in 2 or 3 different social media companies. And Josh lamented the end of Web 2, he called it, which I think is roughly the same as the end of social media. And he remembered, it was a thread of tweets, he remembered the promise of Web 2 was basically the end of portals and the democratization of production and consumption of all media through loosely coupled parts. And you probably remember that era. And he
Right,
basically,
because I was one of the few people who actually saw through it, or I'm one of the early people who saw through it.
Yeah. And so he was saying today represents the end of Web 2. And he wasn't championing Web 3 or AI or the cloud. He was basically just saying we didn't manage to deliver what we said we were going to deliver. And he particularly focused in on how he thinks they underestimated how terrible the human race is, that basically the human race can't cope with open publishing and consumption.
You should have talked to me. You should have read my books. So let's try and separate the smoke and the fire. I mean, to what extent are the numbers coming in from Microsoft and Google and Amazon simply the end of the COVID period and relatively normal?
Well, there's definitely an element of that, but I think there's something else going on, which is there's a slowdown in enterprise spending, which Amazon suffered from in its cloud services, not so much in its e-commerce, and so did Microsoft. It doesn't seem to have stopped people buying the new iPhone because that's a consumer purchase.
Nothing can ever stop anyone buying anything from Apple. You and I know that. We'd buy anything. Whatever they give us, we buy.
We do. And so basically the consumer spending hasn't really slowed down much, but enterprise spending has slowed a lot, lots of layoffs, as we know. So I think it's mainly to do with that. And
but is enterprise spending the canary in the coal mine? Will that eventually come to consumer? It must do eventually.
Well, let's see. I think advertising is part of the enterprise spending, by the way, as well. But the consumer, GDP went up suddenly, and fears of inflation as a result have taken a notch downwards. The stock market actually is up 700 points today.
Right. And you talk about advertising, it's digital advertising. I mean, Martin Sorrell, who loves to be quoted, he doesn't see any slowdown. The WPP people and the publicist people and all the other advertising companies, they're not seeing this. So it's a digital thing.
Well, there's a buying lag in TV and radio and print because you've got to commit a long time ahead. So we're not sure that that's true yet, but I think it's likely to be the case that digital will pick back up. Just because as we get to Christmas, everyone that wants to sell something is going to advertise to try to get you to buy it. So, I'm not that pessimistic. In a 12-month window.
I don't think I've ever heard you sound so, I won't say down, but usually you're always the person who finds the bit of optimism, however bad the news is. But you sound like this is bad news broadly for tech.
Well, it's never bad news when everything's changing, is it? Because if you're paying attention,
it's all crashing to the ground. It's bad news if you get killed. It can't be good news for Facebook. I mean, whatever Zuckerberg might think in his mausoleum or whatever he's building there, I mean, he's really increasingly becoming Citizen Kane, isn't he?
Well, he's making a blunder, which is Bill Gurley did a great quote, which is he did this tweet about when you've spent so much money on a thing, even when you think it might have been wrong, you've got to spend more to prove yourself right. So basically you can't stop.
The counter. I mean, he's been brought up in that counterintuitive way of always thinking he was right, and he's been proved right and right and right. So when you're actually proved wrong, it's hard to believe it.
Yeah, that's my editorial this week. I call it A Tale of Two Platforms, and the editorial. The editorial basically makes the point that Zuckerberg has bet the company at least twice when he acquired Instagram and WhatsApp, and arguably maybe even more than twice. And he tried to get a smartphone. It was called Home and failed, so dumped it. Now he's trying again with the metaverse, which is really just another way of saying he wants to own your attention directly on a device. That's what he wants. He's jealous of Google and Apple because they have a device that owns your attention, and he's just an app on that device. He wants to own the device. And he's made a blunder. He thinks that we'll all agree to wear face masks, and even young people. In fact, most of all young people won't agree to do that. So I think he's just miscalculated, which everyone can do. He has a lot of money, by the way. Don't forget, he made in revenue this quarter over $25 billion. The profit on that was significant, and the amount he's spending on the metaverse is a tiny fraction of his profit. So if anyone can invest in the long shot, it's him.
What's the historical equivalent? I mean, when you think of decline, you think Yahoo, Microsoft's an interesting comp, IBM, I guess, in an odd way. Are there comparisons? When he's making his case, what other companies is he pointing at?
I would think on the downside, MySpace is the comp.
Yeah, but there's never, I mean, MySpace was never a real business in the way. I mean, as you say, Facebook is still a real business. I mean, it's not just going to go bust.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest businesses in the world still. And arguably, if he was to adjust the extent to which he's betting on the metaverse, probably it's seriously undervalued now. If he keeps on keeping on, it probably isn't. And he's a rational guy, so at some point.
Yeah, you're not presenting him as a rational guy.
No, I think he's rational. I think it's rational to make the bet he's making. He's just chosen the wrong bet, but he has to make a bet because he's not prepared to be third or fourth. He wants to be first. Okay, well, fair enough. That's reasonable. But then do something that, personally, I don't know why he gave up on the smartphone. If he was going to go for the metaverse, he may as well have kept going.
But even the smartphone, I mean, Amazon failed on them. Amazon doesn't fail that often. They failed on the smartphone. There's no space for another manufacturer on the smartphone. What about the disappearance of Cheryl? Is that having an impact? Was she the one person who perhaps could talk to some sense, some realism into him?
Well, he's got less constraints, hasn't he? She definitely was a voice of reason on prioritization, is my guess.
All this makes her look really good.
Yeah.
If anyone's come out of this looking good, it's her.
Yeah. I think if we were to make a side bet now on whether 10 years from now he looks good or bad,
yeah,
it'd be brave to bet against him even now, because I don't think he'll stick with the metaverse VR. A lot depends on how fast AR evolves, to be realistic. But I do think I do think that there's something beyond the smartphone. I don't know what it is yet.
Yeah, but the person who knows what it is not Zuckerberg. Apple. It's Apple. It's Cook.
Yeah, it's probably Apple. Yeah.
I mean, there'll be all sorts of devices until historically Apple come along with a device that catches on.
I saw this
same way
guy,
as the iPhone wasn't the first smartphone.
There was a guy 2 weeks ago. He dumped his iPhone in favor of his Apple Watch, and he bought one of those new sport Apple Watches.
Yeah.
And he went for a week with only AirPods and an Apple Watch. And he said it was totally doable, although it was painful because of the screen.
Yeah, well, I sometimes go for walks just with my Apple Watch.
Yeah,
but it's the smaller one.
If you can imagine an Apple Watch with AirPlay, so that the screen doesn't have to be the screen on the watch, but could be any screen, suddenly you're in a world with no smartphone.
But you have to have a smartphone to operate the watch.
No, you don't. It can be on its own.
Well, we got to talk about Musk and Twitter, Keith. What is going on there? Is the guy? I mean, we're talking about Zuckerberg, who seems vaguely rational, even if misguided. Is there any rationality of what Musk is doing at Twitter? It's high. When you read about it and when you look at him, you scratch your head and think, is this guy insane?
Well, if you made a list of pros and cons, there's a lot of pros. He believes Twitter should be a town square, as he said in
At
his
44 bill, I mean, are there many pros at 44 billion or 50 billion or whatever it is he paid for it?
Well, one of the earliest things I learned in the Valley, Andrew, is that money's just a number. Really, it comes down to what percentage of the money you've got you buy for the thing.
I understand that, and I assume that most of the risk seems to be being taken by bankers and lenders, so he probably doesn't have that much on the line. But even so, what is he going to...
Well, what he gets out of it, well, it depends what you think Twitter becomes. But in my world, Twitter could be, and to some extent already is, depending on who you are, the pulse of the world. It's kind of everything, every opinion from both weighty and less weighty people is kind of in there.
Well, that was the week.
Right. But look, if you've got that and you know what to do with it, which I don't think Twitter management ever has known what to do with it. But if you've got that and you know what to do with it, 44 billion could end up, when you consider that Facebook today is already worth 5 times that. Could Twitter be worth more than Facebook? Absolutely, it could. And so it depends what he does with it. And it's certainly a prize asset compared to Facebook, or almost compared to anything. I can't think of anything more interesting than Twitter because everyone's plugged into it. Even you're in it and you are not in Facebook because even though you don't like it, you've got to be plugged into it.
It's going to be interesting. Any good news, Keith? This year, as I said, you always can find some good news. What else is in the newsletter?
What else is in the newsletter this week? Well, Apple has taken another broadside at Facebook. Facebook has got this thing where it has an advertising platform, a bit like Google, but on the iPhone, you can boost your ad. You can pay to boost your post. And Apple's now said they're going to take 30% of everything spent. So suddenly taking 30% of Facebook's advertising money, having already crippled their ability to advertise. So that was fairly decent news. I think the biggest thing this week...
Well, it's good if you're Apple. It's not good if you're Facebook.
Correct. But probably the most interesting thing this week is Ben Thompson from Stratechery wrote a thing called Chips and China, and a guy called Noah Smith wrote a piece on China and the USA called The End of the System of the World. And because it was the Chinese 20th Congress, is it the 20th? Yes, the 20th. And there's lots of news coming out of China about the president moving to a more conservative group within the Central Committee.
Yeah.
The whole thing about China, Taiwan, the US is coming into play. And the narrative inside the Noah Smith piece is all about, he uses a phrase, Chinmerica, to describe the interdependency of the Chinese.
It's not his phrase. I interviewed Chris Miller, who has a new book out on chips, suggesting that the way to make sense of power in the world is who controls the chip industry. He's a young academic, very talented guy at Tufts. And I'm assuming that Thompson at least quoted the Miller book, because it's a really interesting argument about whoever controls chips controls the world. He actually has a whole revised history of Silicon Valley and chips. And in a way, he's vindicating the Biden policy in terms of the chip war against China. Do you think that Biden is making the right decision on going to war, economic war against China on chips?
My guess is he isn't really doing that. Firstly, I do think it's rational of America to do whatever it can to slow China down. In a world of national economies, you do whatever you can to slow your rival down, and so it's completely rational. And one of China's weak spots is that it isn't as advanced as the US in high tech, in semiconductors being a good case in point. So it's completely rational. It can't work, if the goal is to stop China winning, it can't work, and it will hurt America as much as China because of the interdependency of the economies. So it's definitely a tactical short-term thing. Probably a rational actor would be seeking engagement with China by doing this, not seeking a war. And I suspect that's what Biden is really doing.
Yeah, Biden is certainly not a warmonger either, certainly in military or in economic terms. What I hadn't realized that Miller explains in his book and explained to me in the Keenan interview is how important Taiwan is in the chip business.
Yeah, very. I mean, it's
so that adds another complexity given Taiwan. There's some interesting DALL-E news. Is that Space and other companies? I know that OpenAI made a significant investment in this space. Is this becoming a real economy, Keith?
Not yet, although they're probably making money from subscriptions from people who want to play with it. There's a company called Stability AI that has it's the creator of a very well-used competitor to DALL-E, which is called, what's it called now? It's something, I want to say Stability Fusion or something, but it isn't that. I've totally forgotten what it's called, but they invented the DALL-E competitor. And the CEO is British, a young British guy, and he was very prominent this week. He was being interviewed. He's raised 2 rounds of financing in 2 months and started talking about perhaps raising $1 billion. And he hasn't really got revenue yet.
Yeah. So
I think, is it a real economy? No. Is there real innovation happening at the point where human beings are being enhanced by tools that can leverage vast amounts of both visual and other types of data to create things at human request that would have been very hard to do before? Yes, that's real.
I think that stuff's much more real and much more interesting than the Web3 stuff we've talked about. And thinking historically, we go back to 2000, the crash, the fact that the dot-com economy entirely ran out of steam and became a parody of itself. The fact that you had Google in the wings reinventing the internet with Web 2. In a way, maybe 2022 is similar.
No, 2022 is I mean, every year really is, should we use the word dialectical? Things are dying and things are being born, but this is more dramatic. There's a lot more.
But I'm saying that in 2000, you had this shift from 2 economies, the dot-com economy to the Web 2 economy. You know, Google was a startup when the internet economy, when the dot-com economy crashed. And it took a year or 2 for it to figure out a business model, get adults on board. And then you had Web 2. I assume 2024, 2025, you're going to have a similar post-social media, post-Web 2 world. But I don't think it's Web 3. It's something else. I think most people got Web 3 wrong. They just simply saw it as an extension of Web 2 or the principles of Web 2 working. I think it's going to be something more foreign, more different.
Well, there's more than one strand, and Web 3 isn't an adequate enough phrase to describe the strands. That's definitely true.
Yeah, it's a terrible word.
Yesterday, Jack Dorsey released the first decode in what he calls Web 5.
Well, but you can call it whatever he wants. But that is a significant product because that's a fuller realization of the Web 3 ideal in a social media context. What's it called?
Begins with Z. I've forgotten what it's called now, but it's like it's in the same genre as Blue Sky, which we talked about last week. Anyway, I mean, to me, the other thing is what we talked about: compositional AI, which isn't the same thing as DALL-E. DALL-E is what's called generative AI. Compositional AI is when you can take the product of machine intelligence, one or more machines, and weave it into something new that didn't exist before. And that, you know, the end game there is the Star Trek thing where the captains ask questions of the computer, and the computer gives answers that are totally trustworthy, that a human couldn't have given. And I do think we're at a point where that's. I had dinner this week with the founder of Evie, William Tunstall-Pedo is also British. Evie is what is now known as Alexa. So he was the techie that created it, and he's got a new startup called Unlikely AI. And honestly, it was fascinating talking to him, because some of what machines are going to be able to do is phenomenal. In my world, it's a machine can tell you which B rounds to invest in, where a human being wouldn't do anywhere near as well.
Right, and I just did an interview with this Canadian academic, a woman called Karen Backer. She has a new book out about AI or digital tech that will allow us to talk to nature, to other species, and also to trees and plants.
Is that real? How does that work?
I think it's real, because you're seeing all these other books and thinking around this space. She's talking about a new enlightenment. I mean, maybe it's a bit exaggerated, but I think there are, I mean, excusing the pun, we've missed the forest for the trees here in terms of changes. So it's an exciting time and a worrying time. And maybe in 10 years, I'm guessing in 10 years, Musk's acquisition of Twitter at most will be a footnote, but we'll see. Startup of the week, maybe the entire economy, Keith.
Let's go there. Startup of the week this week is Snowflake. Snowflake, I use Snowflake, so I know it very well. And Snowflake stock has been one of those stocks that has taken a massive hammering this year. And this is a piece by Bern Hobart and Max Conrad, who profile why Snowflake is still such an exciting company. And it's a bit long for Startup of the Week, but it's really worth reading, because it gets you into what's going on with the cloud and data. It's really a twin to an article at the top of the newsletter by Thomas Tungers, who we often talk about, called 9 Predictions. Where is it? Here it is. 9 predictions for data in 2023. If you read that and the Startup of the Week, you start to really understand what's going on with data intelligence and the cloud, and how job descriptions are also changing. Like, people who work with data are becoming super valuable now. So Startup of the Week is Snowflake.
And tweet of the week?
There's only one tweet that could have been tweet of the week this week. It's let me tee it up before I show it.
By the chief twit himself.
This had to be the tweet of the week. So it is. Let this sink in.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to admire the guy. I don't know if he was even in
like a setup. I mean, what were they doing? Like, I mean, what was he? Was he carrying that thing just so that he could do the sink in thing?
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's basically a 15-year-old in an adult body, isn't he?
Yeah, and you got to admire the guy. I mean, he's having fun. He clearly doesn't care about money.
Yeah.
And he's at least he's making it interesting, and I think he will make Twitter. I never thought, as you know, I'm not a big Twitter fan, but I think he'll probably make it a little bit more interesting, less of an echo chamber, and a little bit more open. We'll see.
Yep, we will indeed.
That was the week. Quite a week for October the 28th, 2022. I can't imagine next week will be quite as dramatic, but there will be dramas, and we will cover them. So we will see you next week, Keith.
We will indeed. Bye for now.
I've got sunshine on a cloudy day. When it's cold outside,